This is The Quiet End, and tonight I'll tell you a story titled Cathedral of the Crawling Saint. Let's begin. Through the suffocating fog, Elias trudged onward, his weary eyes fixed on the faint outline of the monastery ahead. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of decay, and only the crunch of fallen leaves beneath his boots marked his presence in that forsaken wood. The monastery stood as a specter of its former glory, its once proud stone walls now sagging under the weight of years and neglect. Blackened vines twisted and clawed their way across the cracked facade, as if nature itself sought to reclaim what had been abandoned. Elias hesitated for a moment, his hand gripping the silver chain around his neck, a talisman of faith that had offered him little comfort on his journey. Inside, the silence was not peace but suffocation. The air tasted stale, and the faint odor of rot lingered stubbornly. The hallways were empty, their shadows curling like living things. The chapel, however, bore witness to something more chilling. The monks lay as if frozen in time, their skeletal forms draped in tattered robes, kneeling before an altar that had been swallowed by overgrowth. Some clutched rosaries in bony fingers, others bowed their heads in eternal prayer. Yet their hollow eye sockets seemed alive somehow, fixed heavenward, yearning for deliverance that never came. Elias approached the altar cautiously, his steps echoing louder than they should. The whispering hum began faintly, like a distant murmur carried on the wind, growing stronger with each step. It wasn't sound, not in the conventional sense, but something that resonated within his chest, vibrating in his very bones. It called to him. Behind the altar, the cathedral's depths opened into a narrow, spiraling staircase that descended into shadow. The hum pulsed now, beckoning. Elias hesitated, his hand trembling as he clutched his talisman tighter. The whispers were no longer faint. They spoke clearer now. Promises, warnings, an invitation wrapped in dread. The monks had prayed for salvation. Elias would soon learn what answered. The staircase spiraled endlessly downward, vanishing into a void of shadow. Elias gripped the damp, flaking banister, each step echoing as if the cathedral itself mocked his descent. The hum grew louder, an omnipresent vibration that crawled beneath his skin, settling deep within his chest. It was not malevolent, but neither was it comforting. It simply existed, unavoidable, undeniable. The inner sanctum revealed itself suddenly, as if he had crossed an unseen threshold. The chamber was circular, its walls carved with intricate, indecipherable symbols that seemed to shift under his gaze. At the center stood a glass reliquary, mounted atop a pedestal of tarnished gold. Inside, suspended in unnatural preservation, was a human hand. It was blackened and shriveled, the flesh warped as though burnt, yet the fingers twitched, a slow, deliberate movement, as though testing their own existence. Elias shuddered, unable to tear his gaze away. Below the reliquary, a plaque glinted faintly in the dim light, bearing an inscription, "The Crawling Saint." His instinct screamed to step back, to leave this place. Yet against all sense, his hand reached forward, trembling as it brushed the smooth glass surface. A surge of warmth flooded him, too sudden to be natural. It was not a burning heat, but something deeper, something alive. The hum transformed into faint whispers, indistinct prayers spoken in languages he could not understand. They echoed in his mind, overlapping, resonating, before fading into silence. He stumbled back, heart pounding. The reliquary was unchanged, the hand still twitching its eerie rhythm. But something was different now, something outside. That night, as Elias rested uneasily within the crumbling monastery, he noticed it. A withered flower, long dead and curled at the base of the chapel wall, now stood upright. Its petals had bloomed anew, but they were veined, deep crimson lines threading through the pale white flesh. It swayed unnaturally, though no breeze stirred the chapel air. Elias felt the warmth again, pulsing faintly from the reliquary far below. He realized it was not done with him. Sleep eluded Elias that night. The whispers from the reliquary had faded, but the warmth lingered, an unsettling presence just beneath his skin. His dreams were fragmented, a blur of shadowy figures kneeling in supplication, and a hand crawling across a barren field, its fingers dragging deep furrows into the earth. He awoke in darkness, his pulse pounding, his breath misting in the cold air of the chapel. It was only when he sat upright that he noticed his foot. The injury that had haunted him for months, the one that had turned every step into agony, was gone. He flexed his toes experimentally, expecting the familiar stab of pain, but there was none. The flesh was whole, unmarred, yet wrong. His toes had elongated unnaturally, tapering into twisted shapes that resembled gnarled roots. They curled slightly, as if testing their newfound strength. Elias stared, his breath caught between disbelief and dread. "A blessing," he whispered to himself, his voice trembling. Was this not proof of the divine, proof of the crawling saint's benevolence? He forced himself to believe it, clutching his silver talisman tightly as though its presence could reassure him. Yet the lingering warmth in his foot felt less sacred than it did alive. As the day dragged on, Elias couldn't escape the reliquary's pull. The hum had grown louder, reverberating through the monastery walls, filling the air like an unspoken command. When he ventured back into the inner sanctum, the sight that greeted him was undeniable, horrifying in its certainty. The saint's hand, once twitching faintly, now moved with purpose. Its fingers tapped rhythmically against the inside of the glass, each tap precise, deliberate, and unrelenting. Elias froze at the threshold, unable to step closer. The tapping seemed to sync with his heartbeat, each beat resonating deeper than the last. He swore he could see the hand's blackened skin glisten faintly in the dim light, as though fresh blood had begun to flow through veins long thought dead. He dared not touch the reliquary again, but it didn't matter. The crawling saint had already found him. Elias roamed the monastery, his unease growing with every step. The air felt heavier now, as though the walls themselves were pressing inward. It was during his aimless wandering that he stumbled upon a hidden door, almost imperceptible behind a tapestry of faded saints woven in muted gold. Behind it lay a room untouched by time, a library cloaked in darkness and dust, its shelves sagging under the weight of ancient tomes. Elias lit a nearby candelabrum, its flickering light casting jagged shadows across the room. The manuscripts were brittle, their pages cracked as he turned them, but the words were legible, written in a language that swam into clarity as though the cathedral itself willed his understanding. The texts spoke of the crawling saint, a man once human, whose miracles had fed the starving, healed the dying, and raised the broken. Yet his gifts came at an unspeakable price. With every act of salvation, the saint surrendered pieces of his humanity. His hands blackened first, then his flesh writhed, contorting as he crawled across the earth. The people worshipped him, offered themselves in twisted reverence, but his own form became unrecognizable. As Elias read, the prayers returned. They were clearer now, no longer whispers but fervent chants, their rhythm pounding against his mind. Images followed, grotesque bodies, their limbs twisted like roots, lay prostrate before an ethereal light too bright to comprehend. Their faces were stretched into unnatural smiles, their mouths fixed in voiceless cries. Elias staggered back, clutching the edge of a table for balance. The manuscripts slipped from his grasp, scattering their pages across the stone floor. He saw now that the hum had never truly stopped. It was here too, vibrating through the room, growing louder with every heartbeat. The crawling saint's miracles were not blessings. They were transformations. Elias woke to a sharp, radiating pain in his left arm. His breath hitched as he pulled back his sleeve, exposing flesh that no longer belonged to him. His arm was swollen, the skin stretched tight and discolored, the muscles beneath warped beyond recognition. His fingers had elongated grotesquely, tapering into blackened shapes that eerily resembled the saint's hand. They twitched involuntarily, as though testing their strength. Panic surged as he stumbled down the stairs to the reliquary, desperate for answers. But when he reached the sanctum, the pedestal stood empty. The glass reliquary was shattered, its shards scattered haphazardly across the floor. The crawling saint's hand was gone. His breathing quickened, and a suffocating dread crawled up his spine. He searched the cathedral, the hum growing louder with each darkened hallway he crossed. It was no longer a vibration. It had weight, pressing against his chest, pulling him forward like a rope coiled around his soul. And then he saw it. The hand scuttled across the cracked stone floor, its movements unnervingly deliberate, like a spider navigating its web. Its blackened fingers curled and uncurled in rhythmic precision, tapping softly against the ground. Elias froze, his malformed arm hanging limply at his side. The hand paused. It turned to face him, or perhaps it merely shifted, but he felt its attention as though it were a tangible force. One of its twisted fingers rose, gesturing toward him, beckoning. A voice, deep and resonant, filled his mind, bypassing his ears entirely. Become worthy. The words were not a command, but an inevitability, spoken with the authority of something ancient and absolute. His legs buckled, and he fell to his knees, the hum now deafening, vibrating through his bones. He tried to speak, to shout, but no sound escaped his lips. The hand scuttled further into the shadows, leaving him alone with his transformation. Elias realized he was no longer a pilgrim. He was a vessel. Elias knelt before the shattered reliquary, his twisted arm cradled against his chest. His breath came in shallow gasps, each one carrying the weight of dread and reverence. He pressed his forehead to the cold stone pedestal, tears streaking down his face as his trembling voice broke the silence. Please, grant me understanding. Show me why. The hum enveloped him, growing softer yet more intimate, like the murmur of a distant heartbeat. The shadows seemed to shift. From the corner of his eye he saw movement, slow, deliberate. The crawling saint's hand emerged once more, its blackened fingers dragging across the floor, leaving faint trails of warmth in its wake. Elias froze, his prayers faltering. The hand reached him, hesitating for a moment before crawling onto his disfigured arm. Its touch was not cold but searing, like molten iron reshaping flesh. It clasped his twisted fingers with its own, and then it began to merge. The pain was indescribable, as though his entire being was being rewritten. His flesh stretched and warped, his bones cracking and reforming. The transformation rippled outward from his arm, consuming him inch by inch. His legs buckled, his spine arched unnaturally, his skin writhed as if something beneath it was clawing to emerge. And then the visions came. He was no longer himself. He saw other pilgrims, men, women, children, kneeling in reverence, their faces twisted between agony and ecstasy, their bodies contorted, each one reshaped into grotesque forms by the saint's miracles. Arms became elongated, spines curled into loops, legs rooted into the soil. Yet their faces bore expressions of eerie serenity, as if they had embraced a truth too profound for mortal comprehension. The saint's hand whispered through his mind now, not in words but in feelings. Acceptance, surrender, inevitability. Elias felt his humanity slip away, replaced by something both alien and eternal. His heart raced as he realized he was becoming one of them, another pilgrim consumed by the saint's blessing. But in the depths of his soul a question lingered. Was this salvation or damnation? The monastery began to quiver as Elias staggered to his feet, his newly twisted form struggling to move. The once still walls groaned, their ancient stone surfaces pulsating like flesh. Black ichor seeped through the cracks, pooling onto the floor and spreading with deliberate purpose. The cathedral was alive, not merely a monument to the crawling saint, but an extension of his being, a parasite feeding on devotion. Elias clutched his malformed arm, now fused with the saint's essence, trying to reconcile the truth unfolding before him. The whispers had grown into a cacophony, deafening and insistent. They spoke of salvation, of spreading the saint's gospel, of bringing others into the fold. The promises were sweet, but the undertone was inescapable. A demand, an urgency, a hunger. He looked down at himself, his body now unrecognizable. His flesh had hardened in places, fused with the stone of the cathedral itself. Veins of black ichor threaded through his limbs, pulsating with each beat of a heart that no longer felt like his own. His legs were rooted and warped, resembling the twisted columns of the nave. His chest bore carvings, symbols he had seen in the hidden library, etched into his skin as though he were becoming scripture. Outside the sanctum the air vibrated with life. The monastery groaned louder, its doors and windows shifting as if breathing. Elias felt connected to it, an inseparable part of the organism that was the crawling saint. The whispers urged him forward, not to kneel but to act. He understood their meaning now. He was no longer a pilgrim. he was a herald. They must know, the voices cried in unison, echoing in his fractured mind. They must be saved. Visions filled his head, villages consumed by blackened vines, cities reshaped into sprawling cathedrals of flesh and stone, people kneeling in grotesque worship beneath skies darkened by ichor. The crawling saint's gospel was not peace, it was transformation. Elias felt the monastery shift beneath him, pulling him forward as if it were guiding its apostle into the world beyond. Salvation demanded sacrifice, and the saint's hunger was endless. On all fours, Elias crawled from the monastery's crumbling threshold, his grotesque form silhouetted against the pallid light filtering through the fog. His body was a monument to the crawling saint, a shrine of warped flesh and stone, veins pulsing with ichor, carvings glowing faintly like embers beneath his skin. The hum had become him now, echoing in his every breath, his every motion. Behind him, the cathedral groaned, a sound like dying breaths and the creak of ancient timber. As Elias moved forward, the earth responded. Where his warped hands and feet pressed into the soil, flowers sprang forth in unnatural bloom. Their petals were jagged, sharp as razors, and exuded a pungent aroma of rot that hung heavy in the air. The sight was terrible and beautiful, an omen of the miracles he was meant to sow. The whispers, once chaotic and overlapping, gathered themselves into a single voice now deep and resonant. Its command pierced his mind with terrifying clarity. Go forth and prepare the world. The weight of the words crushed any remaining fragment of Elias's humanity. His thoughts grew distant, replaced by purpose, not his own, but the saint's. He raised his head, his hollowed eyes gazing toward the distant villages hidden beyond the fog. The visions returned, people transformed, landscapes consumed, humanity undone. He understood now that his pilgrimage had never been a choice. It had been a calling, an inevitability, to carry the saint's curse into every corner of the earth. Elias crawled onward, his limbs moving with unnatural precision, the flowers blooming endlessly in his wake. Above him, the fog thickened and the air grew still, as though the world itself was holding its breath. And so the crawling saint's vessel began his work, condemned to spread miracles that would end all things human. Elias was no longer a man. He was salvation, and he was ruin. So, dear listener, if you ever hear a hum calling you from the shadows, will you answer and wonder what you'll become? Subscribe for more chilling tales, and hit the bell to stay in the dark. See you at the next quiet end.